Abraham Lincoln. His face looks back at us from the $5 bill. His words are etched into the marble of the memorial, and his name is spoken with reverence in every school across the country. But behind that monument lies a secret Lincoln took with him to his concrete sarcophagus. The 6'4" giant who saved the nation couldn't save 3 of his own children. His wife was declared insane and locked away in an asylum. His only surviving son witnessed 3 presidential assassinations, as if a curse followed anyone carrying the Lincoln name. And strangest of all, Abraham himself never denied the persistent rumors that he wasn't his father's son. A century and a half after his death, museum archives still hold locks of his hair, blood-stained fabric from Ford's Theater, and skull fragments from his autopsy. These samples could reveal the truth about his origins and explain why his body was falling apart from the inside while he was building a new America, yet the authorities flatly refused to run DNA tests. Whose blood did the 16th president actually carry? Why did his direct line of heirs end in a tragedy of deaths? What exactly is hidden in that Springfield sarcophagus sealed off for over 100 years? To understand the genetic code of the man who freed 4 million slaves, we have to leave the noise of the battlefields and look into his private rooms at the White House on a cold February night in 1862.
But first, if you can hit that like button in the next 3 seconds, it shows you love your mom. And if you subscribe to the channel, it means you love your entire family.
The president's office smelled of dampness from a leaking roof, tobacco smoke, and ink. Outside, a February blizzard howled, but Lincoln didn't notice. Every morning started with a ritual he hated but felt was necessary. He swallowed blue mass, tiny pills made of pure mercury mixed with licorice and rosewater. He believed it was a cure for constipation and melancholy, but it was actually a poison slowly eating away at his nervous system. When the mercury reacted with his already fragile psyche, Lincoln fell into strange states. At night, when Washington went quiet, this giant in a long white nightgown wandered the halls like a ghost. He couldn't sleep. Insomnia was his only constant companion. Sometimes he was found in the library at 3 a.m., leaning against the cold glass, reading Shakespeare or the Bible out loud. That was the only way he processed information, by feeling the vibration of his own voice. His voice was peculiar. When generals reported massive losses at Antietam or Bull Run, Lincoln would suddenly interrupt them with a crude rural joke. His voice would turn into an incredibly high, piercing falsetto that didn't match his imposing frame. People would freeze in awkward silence, taking it for coldness or madness. But for him, that laughter was the only release valve for the pressure. If he didn't choke, his heart, stretched by Marfan syndrome, might have literally burst right there in the office. While Lincoln was burying his children, little Eddie and then his favorite Willie, people in Washington were whispering with brutal cruelty. The Southern elite and Northern Democrats didn't just hate his politics, they despised his biology. Enemies called him the Illinois ape, mocking his appearance. Newspapers ran cartoons of him as a beast with unnaturally long arms. But there were deeper stabs. One Kentucky editor who knew the family wrote that Thomas Lincoln, Abraham's official father, was known as a lazy, sterile man. He questioned where this long-legged bastard with the eyes of a philosopher came from. These rumors had teeth. In county archives, the record of Abraham's birth looks suspicious. In the father column, there's a blurry ink stain as if someone tried to scrape the name away with a razor years later. Abraham felt this gap. He never loved Thomas. He didn't attend his funeral, didn't buy him a headstone, and admitted in private that he and that rough carpenter shared nothing in common, not in face and not in mind. Lincoln built the legend of the man of the people, the poor boy from the log cabin. It was a brilliant political myth, but his body told a different story. His left eye drifted, a condition called hypertropia that made him hold his head at an odd angle. By 1865, he was almost blind in one eye, and constant headaches were a form of torture. Today's geneticists looking at his death masks see classic Marfan syndrome. This connective tissue disorder doesn't just make you tall, it makes you fragile. His aorta was stretched thin like old rubber. Lincoln lived with a ticking bomb in his chest. He knew his body was falling apart, and that gave him a desperate clarity. He didn't have decades to play politics. That's why he moved so fast, signing the Emancipation Proclamation when the country was on the brink. He was racing to finish his mission before his heart gave out.
He left behind mountains of documents, but his biggest secret was locked inside his own skeleton. The truth was waiting in a drop of dried blood on a piece of silk and a few reddish locks of hair clipped on that fatal night at Ford's Theater. These biological clues were a time capsule carrying a code that could rewrite American history. To find the answer, scientists didn't need to open the concrete sarcophagus in Springfield. Lincoln's burial was already a drama. His body was moved 17 times. The last exhumation was in 1901. To stop rumors that the grave was empty, a commission opened the lead casket. Witnesses said when the lid was lifted, the smell of old chemicals hit them. Lincoln's face was perfectly preserved, though darkened to the color of old bronze. After that, the casket was sealed in a massive concrete block 10 feet deep, forever. But in 1995, science found a way around the concrete. Researchers got access to a lock of hair clipped by surgeon Edward Curtis on the morning of April 15, 1865. The hair was matted with presidential blood and bone fragments. To a geneticist, this was the Holy Grail. The DNA was badly damaged by time, but it was the only shot at seeing his biological signature. But Lincoln's lock of hair is just the tip of the iceberg, a tiny piece of a puzzle that somehow made its way to scientists. In reality, America is covered in biological traces of its most mysterious president. The archives of at least 5 major museums and several top-secret private collections hold artifacts that could blow up the official version of history. These aren't just objects, they carry his genetic code, and they have the power to rewrite history books and change how we see our nation. In the heart of the Capitol, at the National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C., Lincoln's coat from Ford's Theater sits under bulletproof glass. The dark blue wool looks almost black in the dim light. If you look closely at the left shoulder, you can see something hidden from most tourists, a dark, stiff stain about the size of a palm. This is where the dying giant's head rested as he was carried out of the theater box. The wool soaked up his lifeblood. Geneticists know that natural wool is a perfect preservative. If they could pull DNA from that stain using today's technology, they would get a sample so clean it would be like a biological map of the man. But the coat stays locked away. Guards stop anyone who even tries to get close to that stain. There's even more chilling evidence at the Ford's Theater Museum. It's the pillow from the Peterson house, the one Lincoln lay on for his final 9 hours. The white pillowcase turned black from dried blood and brain tissue. It's a concentrate of biological data. In 2009, Harvard biologists asked the National Park Service for a tiny sample, just a few cells that wouldn't even be noticed. They promised to prove his true origins and identify his hidden illnesses. The answer was a cold no. No explanation, no discussion, just a wall of silence. The most dangerous evidence for the official myth is kept at the National Museum of Health and Medicine in Maryland. There, behind heavy vault doors in safe number 2246, are fragments of Lincoln's skull. These bone pieces were removed during the White House autopsy. They still show the marks from the .44 caliber bullet. These bone plates still have hair follicles and deep blood stains.
Bone protects DNA much better than hair or fabric, keeping it safe for centuries. For decades, the scientific community has tried to get into that safe. They asked for testing in 1992, 1998, 2003, and 2011. Every time, they were turned down. In 2015, Dr. Philip Makowiak of the University of Maryland told the Washington Post that science can map the DNA of a 40,000-year-old Neanderthal, but isn't allowed to touch a 150-year-old sample of our own president. He said there's no scientific logic for it. The only explanation is that someone is afraid of what they might find. The official line is that testing these items would be disrespectful to Lincoln's memory. But critics ask a simple question: If the results would only prove the official story, why not run the tests and end the debate for good? The government's silence leads to one logical conclusion. These bones and bloodstains hold information that could shake the foundation of American identity. It seems those guarding Lincoln already know the truth, and that truth is so disruptive that the concrete tomb in Springfield must stay closed, so Honest Abe remains exactly who the nation wants him to be. In the silent labs of the Armed Forces Medical Examiner System in Rockville, a process began that looked more like a ritual than a standard test. Scientists in full protective suits worked with broken strands of genetic code, pulling them from microscopic hair roots. The work was nearly impossible. The president's DNA was like a shattered mirror with pieces scattered everywhere. Half of the genetic letters had turned to dust over the last 150 years. The goal was to put together a billion-piece puzzle without knowing what the final picture looked like. The scientists had two goals. First, the Y-chromosome, the marker passed from father to son. This would finally settle whether Thomas Lincoln was really Abraham's biological father. The second goal was on the 15th chromosome. They were looking for a specific mutation in the FBN1 gene. This code error is the signature of Marfan syndrome, which would explain why the great emancipator's body was so tall, strange, and fragile. The process took 3 long years of agonizing waiting. Thousands of hours were spent cleaning the sample of noise, DNA from the surgeon, Curtis, museum workers, and anyone who had ever breathed near that hair. The sequencing moved drop by drop. Every decoded fragment was compared against massive databases and the genetic material of living descendants from the Lincoln side branches, those Kentucky farmers who were long thought to be his bloodkin. In the lab, the tension was high. Scientists knew the results could either confirm the great American myth or tear it down, revealing the 16th president as an outsider in his own family tree. When the final reports landed on the desk, it became clear the truth was far more complex and ironic than any legend. Before challenging Lincoln's male line or hunting for the ghost of Marfan syndrome, scientists decided to track a more fundamental genetic route, the maternal line. Unlike nuclear DNA, which shuffles every generation like a deck of cards, mitochondrial DNA is passed only from mother to child in nearly identical form. It is the perfect biological compass pointing to female ancestors across thousands of years. If the Y chromosome is the last name, mitochondrial DNA is the blood itself, the ancient whisper of a foremother that hasn't faded over centuries. In 2015, a team of genealogists and biologists led by Suzanne Hallstrom finished a project that had lasted nearly a decade.
They did an incredible job identifying and testing dozens of living descendants from the direct female line of Nancy Hanks' sisters and cousins, Lincoln's mother. The results, published as part of the Nancy Hanks Lincoln mtDNA study, sent shockwaves through the academic world. It turned out that Abraham Lincoln's mitochondrial DNA belongs to haplogroup X1c, one of the rarest and most mysterious maternal lines on Earth. To understand how strange this is, look at the stats. Less than 0.01% of modern Europeans carry this marker. But the most shocking part was the geography. The center of X1c isn't in Britain or Germany. Its homeland is North Africa, Egypt, the Horn of Africa, and the Middle East. Haplogroup X1c is a relic of a lost age. It started about 14,000 to 24,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age. Back then, North Africa was the green Sahara, a blooming savanna with rivers and massive lakes. That is where this unique branch of humanity was born, among the early hunter-gatherers of the Nile Valley. Modern genetic maps confirm this. The highest concentration of X1c today is found in the Bahariya Oasis, deep in Egypt's western desert, where 14% of the people still carry this ancient code. A few carriers appear in Italy,
Ireland, and Norway, living proof of the trade expansion of Phoenicia and Carthage. 3,000 years ago, North African sailors dominated the Atlantic, and it seems they left their mark much further north than we thought. How did this exotic African blood end up in a poor woman in the backwoods of Kentucky? Researchers have a few theories. Ancient migration. Carriers could have entered Europe 7,000 years ago with the first farmers, moving from North Africa through Gibraltar. The Phoenician trace. Carthage merchants founded colonies in Britain long before the Romans. They mixed with local Celtic tribes, leaving a genetic fingerprint that eventually reached the Hanks family. Later mixing. North African sailors or merchants could have reached British ports in the 17th or 18th centuries, joining colonial society and passing their rare DNA to the women who later moved to America. The rarity of X1C makes every match undeniable. In 2020, scientists tested DNA from a blood-stained curtain at Ford's Theater. Instead of Lincoln, the sample matched the bodyguard, Major Henry Rathbone. This proved the testing method works perfectly. Lincoln's blood was different. It was African. This changes everything we know about the president. When Lincoln looked at his reflection, his high cheekbones, deep-set eyes, and dark skin, the energy in his veins was born under the sun of the Nile Valley. It is history's greatest irony. The man who risked everything to free millions of people of African descent carried an ancient genetic message from the African continent in every cell of his body. He wasn't just a white liberator. He was a biological brother to those he was saving, a messenger from a great civilization whose blood traveled across oceans and millennia to become a giant from Kentucky. The results for Marfan syndrome came back first. On the lab monitors, the same sequence appeared over and over. The algorithm confirmed it. A mutation in the FBN1 gene. It was a medical diagnosis made 130 years too late.
Lincoln really did carry a genetic time bomb. His height and spider-like fingers weren't just quirks. They were markers of a failing body. His aorta was thinning and stretching. An aneurysm could have burst at any second from a quick move or a heavy sigh. Doctors concluded that if Booth hadn't shown up, Lincoln was still doomed. He would have died from a heart rupture within a year, maybe months. The bullet only beat nature to the finish line. But while Marfan was expected, the Y-chromosome brought true shock. Scientists had nothing to compare it to since the direct male line ended in 1985, so they went for the flanks, searching archives for 2 years to find living men whose ancestors were the brothers of Thomas Lincoln, Abraham's official father. In 2003, they found 3 men who had no idea they held the answer. If Abraham was Thomas's son, their DNA should have been identical. When the results hit the desk, the lab went silent. The Y chromosome from Lincoln's hair categorically did not match the Lincoln family. The gap was so huge, the chance of an error was less than 1%. The official story was dead. Thomas Lincoln, the man Abraham avoided, was not his biological father. The symbol of the nation was a stranger in his own house. The haplogroup they found was R1b-L21, a Celtic marker. Its heart is in the mountains of Scotland and Ireland. This DNA started 4,000 years ago with warriors who crossed the English Channel with metal tools and a fierce spirit. This blood was hardened in wars against Rome and the Vikings. It survived the Great Famine and the trip across the Atlantic. This DNA was out of place among the German and English farmers of Kentucky. It belonged to a different kind of man, someone more intense. In 1808, in a log cabin, this ancient Celtic code met the line of Nancy Hanks. When the scientists first saw the data, there was a silence that researchers call the moment a paradigm crashes. They weren't just looking at a mismatch, they were looking at a biological paradox. Historians have studied the official Lincoln family tree inside and out. It traces back to Samuel Lincoln, a brave immigrant from Hingham, England, who arrived in 1637. According to every church record and family archive, this line belonged to haplogroup R1b,
the dominant paternal line of Western Europe. To understand what that means, you have to go back 5,000 years. R1b is the genetic signature of the Bronze Age people, conquerors from the steppes who rewrote the biological map of the continent. They brought with them the foundations of civilization, bronze weapons, chariots, and the ancestor of the English language. Today, about 80% of Irish men and 60% of English men carry this chromosome. It's the blood of expansion. But the devil is in the details, specifically in the subclades, the tiny branches on this massive tree. The direct descendants of Samuel Lincoln belong to a subgroup called R1b1. This is a classic marker of Eastern England, typical of Norfolk, where Samuel lived before sailing to Massachusetts. This is exactly what scientists expected to see in Abraham's DNA. If Thomas Lincoln were his biological father, the president's Y chromosome would match his Hingham cousins down to the last digit.
But it didn't match. Screening revealed a rare and specific branch, R1b-L21. This wasn't just another English line. R1b-L21 is the genetic code of Celtic resistance. It's a marker found mostly in the Celtic fringe, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. This is the code of the Picts and the Gaels, people who fiercely resisted Roman legions and Anglo-Saxon invasions for thousands of years. They built the Highland clan system, where loyalty to blood was higher than the laws of kings. In eastern English counties like Norfolk, where the official Lincolns are from, this subgroup is extremely rare, found in less than 5% of cases. The conclusion was staggering. Abraham Lincoln's biological father had nothing to do with the Anglo-Saxon line from Hingham. He was a Celt, a true son of Scotland or Ireland who somehow ended up in the Kentucky wilderness in the early 1800s. Who was this genetic ghost? Historians began digging through Hardin County archives again. Several theories emerged. Maybe it was a traveling Scottish trader or a wealthy landowner with Irish roots. Old Kentucky legends, once dismissed as gossip, suddenly gained scientific weight. Locals often spoke of George Brownfield, a wealthy farmer the Lincolns rented land from right when Abraham was conceived. The Brownfield family tree clearly shows Scottish Highland roots. Was it a passing passion or a secret connection hidden behind closed doors? Without testing the Brownfields, it remains a theory, but a theory that the president's DNA supports by 99%. Whatever happened in that cold winter of 1808, biology has spoken. The man who grew up in the shadow of Thomas Lincoln actually carried the Y chromosome of a Celtic warrior. In his veins flowed the blood of people who refused to kneel to empires. It was the blood of those who chose death over surrender. Perhaps this unplanned Celtic heritage explains the terrifying stubbornness with which Lincoln held the Union together when everyone else begged him to compromise. When these results were confirmed in 2007, scientists hit a wall. Publishing this could destroy a core American myth. The National Lincoln Fund blocked the full report, saying it insulted the memory of the president. But the truth leaked out. And now we have to ask, if his origin story is a lie, what else in the history books was made up? Haplogroup R1b-L21 is more than a code. It's a biological echo of clans forged in the battles of the Scottish Highlands and Irish bogs. It's the marker of a people who survived exile and famine to start over in the American woods. His legendary grit, his ability to survive the pressure of the Civil War, and his readiness to tear the country apart to save the Union, these weren't just personality traits. It was the voice of his ancestors vibrating in every cell. His DNA was programmed for fierce resistance, but there was a darker side. Marfan syndrome, the glitch that made him a gangly giant, gave him a sense of his own end. Constant joint pain and a failing heart shaped how he saw time. While others had decades, Lincoln only had the present moment. He felt his body falling apart in the presidential chair. This biological rush may have been the true engine of American history. It's why he signed the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, while his advisors told him to wait for a better political moment. For Lincoln, that moment might not have come. His heart might not have lasted until morning.
He worked 20 hours a day because his body knew time was running out.
So was Abraham Lincoln who he said he was? Genetics gives us a surprising answer. Yes, he was a great American and the architect of our modern nation. His devotion to his goal was real, but biologically, no. He was not the son of Thomas Lincoln, the poor carpenter. His DNA proves that true greatness isn't passed through birth certificates or legal documents. It doesn't belong to famous names or legal marriages. It's born from an impossible cocktail of chances, from ancient Celtic blood that survived for millennia and ended up in a forgotten log cabin, from a genetic defect that doomed him to an early death but gave him the stature of a prophet, and from a will that can only be forged in the fire of personal tragedy. Lincoln lived only 56 years. He lost his mother, 3 sons, and watched his wife lose her mind. His own body betrayed him every day, but he stood his ground and finished his work, because in his veins, despite what the official papers say, flowed the blood of people who survived where survival was impossible. Have you ever taken a DNA test to see whose blood really flows in your veins? Do you know where your ancestors truly came from? Your DNA is the most accurate record on Earth. There's no room for politics or forgetting. Today, a simple cheek swab can erase centuries of mistakes and open the door to your true history. You aren't just a name, you're the result of an epic journey. In our next video, we'll look at another president who was so weak as a child he couldn't run 100 yards, yet he changed the world map and survived a bullet to the chest. Your legacy is more than just a name. Subscribe if your family history matters to you.